Chapter 4, Story 5. Anyone for B-Ball? Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Wario Land 2. In the last part, we started off Chapter 4 here and got a majority of the way through it. And now it's time for us to go finish this off and go start Chapter 5. This level itself I don't find too remarkable for its main level design, but I think it probably has the best boss fight out of anything in the game. Mostly because while it still only has the one thing it does like all the other bosses, the one thing it has actually feels like it has a concept to it that they executed on in a way that's satisfying. Largely, I don't think Wario Land had very good boss fights until 4 on the whole. From my memory, Shake, its boss fights are also pretty decent on the whole. Since I remember bringing that game up last time, Wario Master of Disguise bosses were not that great from my memory. But largely that's because that game's control scheme was lacking for the interesting concepts the game itself tried to present, I think is the way I will put it. At this point, we are already deceptively close to the boss fight, though. Here at the right side of the screen, we're going to have a fire escape to climb on this staircase. There's going to be 2 doors on it. The first door leads towards the boss fight and the boss door. We want to come up to the second one, though, because before we access the boss fight, we obviously want to go find the treasure room, and thus that's going to be our first destination here. As pattern would dictate, considering we are now through, what, this is level number 20? Already at half the stage load of the first Wario Land. Also, while we go to the treasure room, I just want to say, I really do appreciate how varied the treasures are in this game compared to the first game where they were largely just pretty much fantasy themed, or at least like more traditionally thought of treasures. I do wish they kind of mattered more besides just getting the 100% marker, considering this game doesn't have various endings based on how much money you have. But I guess there's not really a way to do that with how this game is technically structured in that regard. I guess the problem I have with that specific structure compared to the first game is that it kind of creates a new Super Mario Bros. 2 kind of issue where, yes, there's money in every level and you need to use it to get either the treasures themselves or the panel pieces, but every coin is inherently less valuable because of that, since it's not building towards something as much. And New Super Mario Bros. 2, that's one of the biggest issues with that game in general. For right now, let's talk about the boss fight. This is going to be Dunk. Dunk is a basketball rabbit. Space Jam joke. The thing is, if Dunk jumps on you, you become a ball, and if he grabs you at that point, he throws you into the basketball hoop. If you jump on Dunk, you turn him into a ball, and you can throw him into the basketball hoop. You want to stand roughly between the middle 2 buildings on either the previews in the background. First to 3 points wins. This is a cool boss fight. The basketball he throws at you directly is only there to try and knock you back so he can jump on you. This boss fight has a concept, it does well with it. I like this one a lot. It's the best boss in the game. Pretty much bar none. There's only really one maybe I like as much as this, but no, this is the coolest one. I wish the other boss fights were as quality as this one is, but oh well. That's Chapter 4, all wrapped up. Overall, probably is my favorite chapter because there's only really one level I'm not the biggest fan of, and that's just because it takes a little long and I don't like its general up and down and all around structure compared to the other levels in the world. Time for us to move on to Chapter 5. Final chapter? Syrup Castle. Get to the castle. Welcome to our final chapter. Ignore things I may have foreshadowed earlier. It's totally the final chapter. This set of 5 levels largely uses a lot of the things we've seen throughout the game to a pretty good effect, considering we're already seeing the seagulls and the turtle from way back in Chapter 3. This is another solid world on the whole, honestly. Plus, I love the sunset color palette we have in some of these stages. With that said, because they are going to throw a lot of what we've seen in the game at this point, even only one level at a time, at us, they definitely step up the complexity of the level design here. Like, no shit, the end of a game is going to probably be the hardest part of it, but they throw a surprising amount of things at you in a row in this world, so it can be kind of overwhelming especially if you didn't take the time to properly experiment around with how certain mechanics work in earlier worlds in the game. Specifically when it comes to the states of Wario, you're going to want to know about how most of them work. You're going to want to know how to counter certain enemies more deliberately, like these giant blob enemies. You want to just kind of gently jump around them. Although I do eventually want to backtrack through them because there's something down there on the bottom left of the screen, call it a hunch. And most of all, while it never really gets too hard, it just gets more complex, if that makes sense. Take your time with it. Trying to rush through this will probably make you lose more money than it's worth. And if you're trying to do the treasure hunts in one run, let alone get the number matching puzzles done, losing too much money in a row can be devastating, making you have to eventually revisit this level in a way that might be annoying, or you can just get lucky and get one of the 100 coins to show up. No, it faded too quickly. That's another reason why I greatly dislike those blob enemies. In the case they drop that, you're probably not getting to it in time without taking either a hit yourself or it being the last one in a set. Although notably, when it comes to Wario's knockback in this game, you can kind of game it a little bit in a way kind of similar to the damage boosting in Super Metroid, where if you're about to take a hit and you turn your sprite around really quickly, there's a decent chance Wario will damage boost through the enemy, in my experience. It's not guaranteed. It's easier to do in some places than others, where it does feel a little easier to do. But it can help you get to certain things like that in time. Yeah, worth noting, many drop by enemies does fade, as we saw there. I think it's always the same timer, but it feels so much shorter on one of the 100 silver coins, as they're just so much more valuable feeling, and they're shiny. Also, like I mentioned earlier, I don't know what the rates of those spawning are. Future Me will have probably posted it back when in that specific video in the LP already, and I'll probably post it again here just for having it twice. But I swear in my experience, they're a little more common to see from blocks you break than enemies. But that might just be how the die is rolling for me, rather than it being actually how it is in the game's code. Because it probably is just like a random set variable and all that jazz. But I think most people that play video games can attest to having either absurdly good or absurdly bad luck in one regard or another when it comes to emulates like that. Like, I know there's some people who get some absurdly good spawn rates on gacha, some get some really good shiny Pokemon rates and all that. One that immediately comes to my mind that I think I may have told on an LP before, I've definitely said this one on stream, is when the PC version of Persona 4 Golden came out. Me and my friend Anthem, who you might remember from the Final Fantasy IV both post-game and interlude, we both played that. Like in my friend Quill's Discord together. When it came to the dungeons, I had absurdly good spawn rates on Rare Shadows, so I was getting some pretty good experience in being a little overleveled. She did not get that. In fact, any Rare Shadow that showed up usually managed to disappear on her, and effectively from that, on top of just some absurd stuff in Smash Brothers that was happening around the same period, that server effectively coined the terms Kyle RNG and Anthem RNG. And they've kind of stuck in multiple regards. Well, I think actually Anthem RNG might have technically existed before that, now I think about it, from their time as a mystery dungeon speedrunner. At this point, though, we're reaching towards the end of this specific level, as well as where the treasure room itself is, because this is one of the later treasure rooms in the game. Now that we've actually reached Syrup Castle itself properly, I love the color palette here. I love the softer purples. I love the pinks used as shading on it. This looks so good. I love Game Boy Color color palettes, because I think they do a good job of both adding depth, but also having good color choices that pop well against each other without really detracting from it, at least in a lot of the major releases. Those, by the way, are hidden flame blocks. They aren't marked as flame blocks, but they only will be broken by Fire Wario. Keep that in mind. Yeah, like, I think what is probably my favorite looking Game Boy Color game. Wario Land 3 is gorgeous. The Oracle games are absurdly good looking as well. Definitely not the Mega Man Extreme games. I like Extreme 2 especially a decent bit, but they're not exactly the greatest looking. Helps that most of those sprites are effectively based on a Game Boy scale rather than a Game Boy Color, if that makes sense. Story 2, Storm the Castle. Trust me, we're already on it. This stage actually has one of my least favorite starts to a stage in the game, because we start with a pretty tall vertical room that has several mallet apes in it with a lot of thin platforms, meaning the entire thing here is avoiding being turned into Spring Wario. The annoying thing about the mallet apes in specific, because they are a larger enemy type, they're a little harder to stun in general, And it's very likely if you just try to shoulder charge into them unprepared, you're gonna get turned into Spring Wario. I think that might even happen here. The best way to kind of give yourself an edge is to use the ground pound in one of two ways. Either coming from above like a platform like this just for the extra hit, or to use the ground pound to either stun them in place with the shockwave of it when they all bounce up and down, or use the ground pound to have them turn around and then shoulder charge into their back. It's reliable, but at the same time, if you're not fast about it, it's easy to hesitate too long and completely get just turned into Spring Wario anyway. Spring Wario is honestly pretty annoying in the long term of the game. But you know, tracks with other spring-related power-ups in the overarching mega ship franchise that is Mario. Looking at a specific one in Galaxy 1 and 2. I'll bet that one's more annoying due to how it controls rather than it being used as a hazard. Even then, it's only really a couple of specific missions that it really comes into play and be annoying in anyway. I distinctly remember, though, out of all the power-ups that stay through the series, Spring Wario, by the time you reach 4, gets honestly pretty fun to use, despite its controls still being kind of annoying. But that's because, again, they expand on each of the transformations that Wario gets here into in different ways in all of the sequels, moving forward from here. And by the time you reach 4, you get some good stuff out of it. Speaking of transformations, this is Tiny Wario. Fun little reference to not only your depowered state from Wario Land 1 and the Virtual Boy game, but also just a reference to the ending of Super Mario Land 2. So Tiny Wario's big thing is agility. Because he's smaller, he runs faster, but also he can jump higher and also do so into one-tile high passageways that Wario himself cannot crouch jump up into like up there. Like with most power-ups, though, it does get canceled when you enter water, so keep that in mind. It's also one of the more annoying ones to get inflicted with in terms of actually getting it done, in that it's inflicted by the wizard enemy, which is quite literally two of the spear pirate enemies standing on top of each other. And if you bump into that enemy beforehand, they do just separate, and you have to leave the room and re-enter to actually use them as the wizard that inflicts the Tiny Wario status ailment on you. It's not that often seen. I think at most it's maybe in 4 levels-ish, maybe even 3, but it's worth noting all the same. Also has one of my favorite songs out of every single power-up in the game. There's something about it that's just so high energy and silly in a way that I enjoy, without just sounding like wet farts, because Wario Land as a series, soundtrack-wise, has that kind of energy to it to begin with, very intentionally, mind you. But when the series has a song that doesn't sound like that, I usually really like it, like the very relaxing beach area adjacent song we heard earlier in the LP already. Something I also find pretty cool about this level in specific is that it sort of mirrors one of the levels from Wario's Castle, given we also have the return of the shallow waters with currents that you have to ride on top of furniture and jump across to get to places. There's something about the specific use of that here that I really appreciate. Also worth noting is that this level is also pretty large. And I talked about, like, the scale of levels back during that level I didn't like in Chapter 4. But something I didn't really bring into that is that pacing also matters a lot. If you have a large level, but there's a lot of things to do in it in a way that's well executed, it doesn't feel as large as it actually is, which is admittedly something I do think Master of Disguise, for instance, attempted to do, but just failed because of the control scheme. Meanwhile, that level, for instance, is large, but doesn't have a lot going on in it. Here, we got a lot of small areas that have decent other things going on, and the main level itself still has a variety of things to do within it. The pacing matters so much in basically any given platform and level. Now we came into this room to actually hit the switch block that I forgot to hit a moment ago, so I have to backtrack through that little gap we made in order to make those purple blocks swap their locations. But in doing so, we're going to reach a room that has an enemy I don't think we've actually seen yet. If we have, I just completely forgot to talk about them. We're going to have these little snowman enemies. They inflict a specific state on Wario that's probably the most actively irritating in the game. They freeze you. When Wario gets frozen, he slides backwards uncontrollably until he hits a solid wall. Now, there are times you can actually use that to your advantage to either get to enemies that would inflict states on you more easily, to get through specific hazards like spikes and all that. But at 9 times out of 10 you see it, it's going to be there to try and make you lose progress in a room in a way that I do not like. They are also notably considered heavy enemies, so you do have to lift them a little slower than you would any other enemy type in the game, really. This room in specific has another switch to hit that will swap the purple blocks once again, and if you want to finish the level, you can hit it or not hit it. It's just that hitting it allows you to more easily avoid this upcoming snowman enemy. The thing is, sometimes enemies won't actively aggress on you if you try to sneak up on them like that, allowing us to hit that enemy and get into here to get these coins without having to swap the blocks. It also showcased, I think, the first use we've seen of Zombie Wario. Zombies or ghost enemies will inflict that on you. Zombie Wario shuffles left and right pretty slowly and can actively kill a lot of enemies just by touching them. But you can't jump while you have it. But if you somehow fall from a platform onto one of the thin one-way platforms, you'll actually fall straight through them, allowing you to access areas that otherwise wouldn't be accessible. Also notably, it's also only cured by stepping into some form of sunlight. Thankfully, effectively every, if not every, room in the game where you can have Zombie Wario inflicted on you has a window that bleeds sunlight into the room to cure it for you should you get inflicted by it. Story 3, defeat 4 ducks. This is kind of a weird level, honestly, structurally. There's 5 doors. One of them just has a switch in it. The other 4 are all in the corners and have a number on them. There's some enemies to get through to them to begin with alongside coins, but the end goal is actually a room at the end of every single hallway that has just one of the danger ducks in them. Killing all 4 of them in any order finishes the stage. And something about the way they specifically execute it weirdly reminds me of the Forest Temple. The fact there's ghosts immediately nearby probably helps with that a little bit. I think they normally do have a darker color palette than most of the other danger ducks we've seen in the game, but largely they die the same way, just dash into them or otherwise, and they die. Do kind of wish they dropped a guaranteed, like, 100 coins, but I feel like that would probably be a little spammable because that'd be a pretty short level that gives you a guaranteed 400 plus coins on every visit. And while there's a lot of levels in this game you can get a lot of good coin from very quickly, that probably would have been a little much, wouldn't it? You do eventually need to hit the switch to reverse the state of the purple blocks, but you can do it at basically any time you want, as long as you've taken care of 2 of the 4 ducks. It really just depends on what you want to get done and how you want to get it done. And while we saw Zombie Wario last time, and you could have actually seen it as early as Chapter 1, Stage 5, this is the first level you're required to use it to get everything done. As up here, we got one of the ghost enemies that will inflict it. But there's an area down below the door we just entered from we can't access unless we fall down as Zombie Wario. Yeah, you just melt right on through those platforms. I actually really like how they made that look visually in Wario Land 4 from my memory. That is one thing I will very much give the Wario, like, sub-franchise, is that even late into their respective adventures, they'll still be introducing new things, and largely they feel like they explore them to a pretty full extent. But does it always work? No, but at least they try to. I feel like some games will just kind of coast on the stuff they introduced earlier on and never really do anything really well thought out with them, whereas this game, they do some pretty devious stuff by endgame, I won't lie, especially for 100%ing type shenanigans. I think the worst case of that is probably either Master of Disguise once again, or Wario World. Having, again, recently replayed that, man, that endgame gets weirdly strict with its little required bonus areas. It's ridiculous. Alright, another new mechanic here. We got an ice cube. You throw it like it's an enemy. However, unlike the enemies, it guarantees a respawn every time you just leave it off screen. So they'll use these in cases where they know maybe the throws you need to make are either a little precise or otherwise, or you need to make a lot of throws in a row. For instance, here we got a bunch of enemy blocks that will just drop coins and all that, but hey, that means you also get a pretty good amount of chances here to get some silver coins. That leads directly to another new mechanic. That thin platform that enemy was on. That is an enemy-only platform. You cannot stand on that. With that said, there are times they might say put an enemy you can just bounce on over and over again on top of it to get from one side of it to the other. I like that a lot. So at this point, we have 3 of the 4 ducks down. There's only 1 door left to go in, number 4 on the bottom right. And on my first playthrough, I basically went in order anyway, but I recommend saving the 4th door for last. If only because it's also where the treasure room is located. If you want to have enough money to either use it to begin with, or at the least use the lower difficulties in it, you probably do want to save it for last. There is also notably some coins you can get in this room by bouncing around this mouse enemy. The mouse itself never outwardly attacks you, you just kind of bounce it around back and forth to get to things, but it can be a little iffy to work with. But this is one of the cases where I was talking about that you can effectively do in the little thin enemy-only platforms. If you hold up in A when you're jumping off an enemy, you can combo them in such a way where you never have to touch the ground and either not land on enemy-only platforms or just completely traverse over spikes completely safely. That does seem like it'd be an incredibly useful piece of tech, and when it actually is needed, it is. There's one specific level way down the line I'm thinking of. But at most, you'll need to do that if you're trying to get a lot of coins, or 100% at most, maybe 3 times, maybe 4. Also, this is me doing what I talked about earlier, where if you just reverse your direction right before you get hit, especially on like spike floors like that, you can damage boost yourself backwards enough while still losing some coins. And there are times where that can save you a little bit of headache. With that said, it really depends on how much money you're trying to keep up. If you're trying to really make sure you get enough to do the number matching minigame and all that, it really just depends on what you're trying to get done. If the game actively had endings that were decided based on the amount of money we had, that would matter a lot more than it actually does here, admittedly. Now, the last duck in specific kind of combines some things we've already seen level up to this point. Namely, it's going to take the ice cube we saw earlier, as well as the enemy-only platform. We need to actively throw the ice cube up at said duck to knock them down in order to actually, take them out in the one shot it usually takes. The accuracy definitely still leaves a little bit to be deserved, but it's easier to hit that one enemy than it is, say, precisely destroying enemy blocks with throwables to make platforming happen. In the few cases the game requires you to do something along that line. And even then, since the ice cubes respawn infinitely, even easier in that regard. But with that, I'm gonna need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 7, we're taking the fight directly to Captain Syrup. See you guys then.